Retirees are once again our primary home buying demographic on the Sunshine Coast. In the September episode, I'll explain why that's important to sellers, and we'll also talk about BC's new tenancy rules that are strangling the sale of rental properties.
When my wife and I moved to the Sunshine Coast about 10 years ago, it was us and a bunch of retirees. And maybe 5 years ago, that demographic changed a little bit. There was more people our age. I want to say young, but I don't know if that's accurate. But
more middle-aged. Yeah.
Middle-aged. But I get the feeling that's maybe not the case now and that we've reverted back to being primary retirees buying on the coast. And I'm wondering if that's accurate or if I'm imagining things.
From what I've seen, yes, we're back to a primary buying demographic being retirees. I was one that bucked the norm and wrapped my head around commuting and did that for 8 years to be able to buy a house that to me was a lot more affordable on the Sunshine Coast. And there was a small percentage, back then, that was 20 years ago, that were doing that. But by large, the primary buying group were retirees. And you can kind of see that, with, local, councils in different municipalities, that kind of stuff, what their motivations are. I mean, it's very much not, increasing services for kids or any of that kind of thing. I mean, it's more, community centres and that type of stuff. And then as far as development, we have, specifically in Gibsons, but probably on the whole Sunshine Coast, be quite stifled on development because you get that NIMBY attitude of, retirees that get to a place and they've made their money and they're comfortable and they like the lifestyle that they have and they don't want any development or any real change there. So up until probably right when COVID happened, that was, our primary buying group. COVID happened and, like we've talked about before, the ferries went from being a barrier to market to kind of a benefit, an extra layer for the disease. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people were under the delusion that now they've worked from home because of this, pandemic, they'll be able to work from home for perpetuity, which we found out wasn't true. And now a lot of people have to go back. So we're kind of back to the ferry being a more of a barrier to market than a benefit, even with the improvements, I think, this year that have been made, or this summer specifically with the hourly ferries. I mean, It's been a lot better, but it's still, really the same sort of commute time as living somewhere like Chilliwack. So if you're going downtown Vancouver, if you factor in all of the time that it takes to get in the ferry lineup, on the ferry, even if it's all on time, to drive in that rush hour traffic to get there, to return and come back, it's about a 3.5 hour commute when you factor everything in. So really that's about the same as driving to and from Chilliwack. And that's why up until COVID happened, our median house value was very similar to that. And it was very much driven by, retirees that didn't necessarily have to get to the city every day and were happy having their grandkids and family visit them, kind of over here.
If the ferry was a cap on prices prior to COVID and we saw a big run up in prices during COVID because, as you mentioned, the isolation here due to the ferry was more desirable. Are you expecting that we'll see that prices then will return to
depreciate?
Something?
Yeah. So typically the coast has always operated on a 7-year cycle, right? So over that 7 years, prices go up, prices go down, right? It's one of the few markets historically where, prices for a house, a detached home has dropped in value over time. But on the whole, over 5 to 10 years, prices always go up. What I've seen over the last 18 months is we've basically seen a depreciation in prices from where they were at the peak to where they are now. Have we hit bottom? I think we're getting pretty close. I actually am a little bit optimistic for this podcast because I am seeing that although August is historically always slow on the coast, we have had some activity here. And I am seeing signals in the market that there are buyers out there that are serious that are coming back in September. So my take on it is if you're a buyer that's been sitting on your hands waiting, now probably September's the time to pull the trigger and to get into that market, especially if it's a 3 to 5 year, or your forever home kind of thing. Anyone trying to flip property, I mean, given the regulation changes and that kind of stuff, it's pretty hard to do that anyway. Now's not the time to do that. But if you are looking to, invest in a property on the coast, probably September's the time. When will we bottom out? I'd say between now and spring. And then I would start to see, prices going up again starting spring. So that's kind of what I'm seeing.
If the market is reverting to mostly retirees, what do sellers need to do to attract that retiree buyer?
What are retirees looking for? Typically, they're looking for one-level living most of the time, depending on their needs, that kind of stuff. But If you have a master on the main, that type of thing, or a ranch or a bungalow, that would be, a good thing. They like garages, it really depends on, do you kind of mean what would you do as far as renovations to your house goes, or?
Is there a way to present the home that makes it more attractive to retirees, or is it strictly going to just be nice pictures and get your price right?
Well, I think pictures and price right, are going to be key because, fundamentally you can't really change, what your house is like. But, this would go more to a marketing thing. So what, we try to focus on when I'm working with Burnt Boat or, doing marketing myself. I'm always trying to show the things in the neighborhood that would be appealing to that buyer group. So maybe as opposed to highlighting, like the recreation center or the soccer fields for the kids, you might want to talk about pickleball courts and the proximity of them. Hospitals are always important. Sechelt Hospital or the Gibsons Medical Clinic, talk about where those resources are, for retirees. Maybe, what grocery stores are offering delivery for that type of stuff. And then, House Sound Pharmacy and the things that they offer for retirees as far as filling prescriptions and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of, what the shift that we've kind of made is seeing what the primary buyer group coming in. We're trying to highlight the things in the community and in proximity to an individual property that would appeal to that, that end user kind of thing.
Another story in BC that has affected us on the Sunshine Coast as well is that the province has changed its tenancy rules for when a seller is selling their home and there's a new buyer moving into it. I've heard that they've changed how much time or how much notice you have to give the tenant before the new owner moves in, but I'm not really understanding what's happening there, and maybe you can explain that.
What it has been, for the last few years, it's been you have to give 2 full months notice to a tenant. Okay. So if you're a tenant renting a house and your landlord says, I'm going to sell it, and so say it's January, they say, I'm going to sell it in January, and you go, okay, and then in the middle of January, they get an offer and the new buyer wants to move in. They had to give you 2 full months notice. So the balance of the month in January didn't count. You get February and March, you'd have to be out by April 1st, right? That was the old kind of way of doing it. Then they changed it to 4 months notice. So the 4 months notice was, so if you got an offer in January, in the middle of January, half of January wouldn't count. February, March, April, May, you'd have to move out by June, right? Which is great for the tenant, understandable. But for a buyer or for a seller, it's going to really limit the buyer pool that can buy that, because the majority of people cannot buy a home and then wait 4.5 months to move in.
Right.
The other thing is with the change in interest rates and that kind of stuff is, and specifically to the Sunshine Coast, is a lot of the long-term rentals were, let's say, well, not necessarily undervalued, but weren't enough to give a capitalization rate that could compete with just investing your money in a bank.
Right.
So all of a sudden what happens is that you're not going to be able to sell a rental property to an investor because just the return isn't enough anymore. And it's very hard to sell it to an end user, someone that's actually going to move in, because they can't wait for 5 months or whatever it is to move in. So there was, kind of a lot of pushback, I think, from, different lobbies and whatever. And what's happened now is they've changed that to a 3-month notice now.
Okay.
So that 3-month notice is still very challenging. I mean, basically, I'm reluctant now to take on rental properties. I used to specialize in doing it, try to work really well with the tenants, that kind of stuff. But now it's very, very hard to do, just because there's such a small pool of potential buyers that can sell their house, wait 3.5 months to move into a new house, because typically, if they're upgrading, if they're not first-time buyers and they're upgrading, they're then reliant upon selling their house to get the funds to buy the new house.
Right.
For first-time buyers, maybe, that can kind of work. But a lot of those rental properties, the people that own them have got into the market in the last few years, so they're underwater on the rental anyway, and so it tends to be a very challenging thing to sell them. So, I mean, I know it's kind of good for tenants, but it hasn't been the best for landlords or property owners that are looking to sell, because, their financing or their mortgage is coming up and now they've got to renew and they can't afford the renewal. They can't put the rent up on the tenant to service that debt, and they can't sell it. So, it's not a good situation.
So what do you think we'll see happen with that in the extreme? Will there be people that will...
Foreclosures, probably.
Oh, you think that it'll get that severe?
Yeah. I think that we're just starting to... I mean, I think that, our market on the coast here is balancing out, and we're getting into more of a rhythm, with our buyer groups and that kind of stuff being what they are. But there are a lot of people that are underwater. There's a lot of people that are still operating Airbnbs, even though they're not meant to be because they have to, hoping that, that they don't get reported
Right.
and that they can continue to do that. But, if that revenue dries up and they have to go to long-term rental or, they're probably not going to do that because as soon as they do that, it's going to kind of make that property unsellable. And so you're going to see a lot of stuff coming on the market. And the people that have potentially made the mistake of getting into a long-term rental with these tenancy rules being changed, what are they going to do? If no one can buy their property and the rental amount isn't going to cover their mortgage and they can't afford the mortgage and now they're renewing the mortgage at a much higher rate, how's that going to play out, right? I mean, they're either going to have to try to sell it for a big loss or, some of them will probably walk away, right?
I would think that the new tenancy rules are also not great from a new investment perspective, that if the rules are perceived as being too onerous to exit a property when the investor is ready to move on from that investment, that it would make it so that people don't even want to buy rental property in the first place. And if you don't have people buying rental property, then you don't have enough rentals for people in the community.
So I think that, if you were to have some money now and you wanted to invest long-term in a property and you buy the right property and you use a property manager, because that's a big thing that people don't do, like these nightmare situations with tenants. Typically, I talk to property managers and they say the easiest thing to do as a bad tenant is to get a good reference from your landlord because they want you gone, right? Use a property manager, they're going to do a thing called a pre-screen that's going to do a credit check, all this kind of stuff. And you can't really hide from that. If you don't pay your bills, it's going to show up there, not some guy looking to get rid of a bad tenant giving you a reference, right? So if you, do all the right things now and you get the right, rental agreements in place, so it's a fixed term rental with the option to renew as opposed to a month to month, which gives a little bit more negotiating power to the landlord and flexibility on using their property when they want to, kind of thing. If you do that and plan it out correctly from this point forward, you could make an argument that on the long term with real estate appreciation, it still makes sense to be a landlord. Where people are hurting right now and where the people feel like, they've had the rug pulled out from under them is they're investors. So they've had some extra money. They've bought a little cabin up in Sandy Hook or whatever. And they were renting that out short term. Then all of a sudden, they're told you're not allowed to rent that out short term anymore. You have to rent it out long term. There's great demand. Okay, great demand. Instead of $4,000 a month, we're only going to be making $1,500, but we're going to have that property, and it's going to appreciate over time. And we can always sell it if times get tough, right? So they make that change. They put a tenant in, then interest rates go up, and they're not allowed to do the short term rental anymore, and then they're not allowed to get rid of that tenant anymore. So then they come to the point where they're renewing their mortgage and their first mortgage was at 2%. Now they've got to renew at 7%. They're not allowed to charge any more rent to the tenant. They can't sell the house, right? Because no one's going to wait 4 months or 3 months to move in. Those people are the ones that have kind of been screwed over. And they're the ones where I see, stuff, negative or detrimental things happening down the road. Because like you said, it's not good for the rental market.
Right.
Not having turnover in rental properties. And, so I guess that's a convoluted answer to the question. It still makes sense if you do it the right way to rent, to be a landlord, screening people in the right way and getting the right amount of rent and writing the leases the right way. It's just if you do it the wrong way, it seems that, the government's pulled the rug out from under people and now they're caught. And there's a lot of them. And there's a lot of these mortgage renewals are going to be coming up over the next 18 months. And I think we're going to see a bit of a glut of that property on the market. And I don't know who really is going to buy it because other than first-time buyers, it's hard to get that transition from selling your house and waiting 4 months to get into a new one. I'm absolutely not anti-tenant. It's just that some of the rules that the government has changed definitely makes it less desirable to have investment property, real estate property, and does hurt people that have been doing all the right things and trying to supply that rental housing to the community, but now if their circumstances change and they need to sell the property, it's very, very, very hard to do it. Hopefully, what will end up happening is the interest rates will drop a little bit, things will become a bit more desirable for investors, and and maybe, there'll be more opportunity in, say, Gibsons or whatever to do that short-term rental, which is drying up in Sechelt.
Tony, what do you have for sale in September of 2024?
What don't I have, Paul? The highlights are obviously that Italian villa that we have on Sandpiper Road in Sechelt. You guys did a beautiful video for that one, and it's a lot of house and a lot of property and a lot of options there, and yeah, it's pretty spectacular. No expense was kind of spared there, so it's a pretty going to be a buyer that kind of likes that kind of vibe. But I think there is definitely a buyer out there that's going to absolutely love that. So that one's easy to show, and you can also rent out one of the suites if you want to go live before you buy kind of thing.
Right, okay. Take it for a test drive.
Yeah, so that one's a great one. We've still got the one on Velvet Road in Gibsons. We just did a price reduction on that, so that's under $800 now. That gentleman's on his way to Alberta. He didn't watch that video. You'll say, don't move to Alberta. He's doing it. So he's heading off that way, so he's quite keen to get that one sold. Beautiful view and nice big property on that one. And then, we got 1044 Woodsworth, which, again, that one's been sitting there. We've had a lot of activity on that one. No offers. We had one offer, but it was someone trying to lowball us, and they're not going to go for that. So that's an estate sale. So you do have to kind of wait for a month or so on probate for that one. So they're in no rush, but it is priced really well, and it's a wonderful neighbourhood. Phase 2 of Parkland. I think they're at phase 4 now. So, that's a great one. And, and then my little house on Sargent Road. That guy's super keen to get rid of that one. That one's now, I think, $769. We'll drop that one down too. And great view there, and good starter home for someone, and a lot of potential to kind of build onto that one and increase the value. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. While you're here, maybe you want to check out one of my listings or watch my video about why you should choose me to sell your home.